So several years ago, I was borrowing a Honda Civic, a manual stick shift car, and I was going to teach myself to drive it. I didn't know how to drive stick shift at all. The person that loaned me the car, his name was Mark Wallace. My name is Mark Walz. We have very similar names. Anyway, so I was eventually able to teach myself to drive this after long and hard, lots of stalling out and stuff like that. But I never learned some of the basics and nobody taught me. I really did teach myself. I never learned some of the basics, like the fact that you should put the car in first gear when you're parking it, or maybe you should put the emergency brake on when you're on a hill. So I found this out the hard way one day, and I learned this lesson in downtown Huntington, West Virginia. So I noticed I needed gas, and I also noticed that I was hungry. So I decided to be thrifty and kill two birds with one stone. I drove to the speedway and decided to fill up my fuel in my car and my stomach as well at the same time. So I pulled into the fuel pump, filled up my car with gas, and then I went inside to see what kind of food I could get. It took me a long time to decide what to get, but I finally decided to settle on a It'll Do chili dog from the gas station and a Coca-Cola slushie. It wasn't the best decision, but it was also not the worst decision that I made that day. When I was next in line to check out, it was like I was coming up the register, it was my turn to check out, put myself on the counter, and a guy comes running inside. He comes right up to me and he says, "Are you the one with the tan Honda Civic?" I was like, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Your car just rolled out of the gas pump, through the parking lot, across the street, down the street, and across 2 lanes of traffic and hit a car." I was like, "What?" So my stomach immediately turned, and it wasn't because of the chili dog. I hadn't eaten that yet. So I left that combination chili dog and slushie on the counter, ran outside, and found that he described it perfectly. My car had left the gas station, it had rolled across the street, down the street, 2 lanes of traffic, and hit a car. But thankfully, it was a parked car. I thought maybe it hit, someone in traffic. So somehow it had crossed 2 lanes of traffic in busy, rush hour time in downtown Huntington, West Virginia, and avoided any kind of traffic. But it hit a parked car. So I got into the passenger seat of my car, and I figured I'd get it out of the road. Put it in reverse, back up into the speedway parking lot, parked it, and then went to go check the damage of the car that it hit. And I definitely saw damage on the backside. I was like, "Oh no, this is terrible." Okay, so I guess I need to leave my insurance information on here since no one's in the car. So I didn't have a pen, didn't have a piece of paper. So I went back inside to the gas station and I got a pen and paper and I got my chili dog and slushie and I walked back out and I find that there's police surrounding my car now. There's cop cars on either side, lights flashing, sirens blaring, all that. And I'm like, I walk up to them like, "Is this your car?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "It was involved in a hit and run." I was like, "It's not hit and run. I just got out of the street and also I was just getting my chili dog and a pen and paper." They were like, "Well, we don't even see any cars that it hit." So I told them, "Well, it hit this one over here." And they went out there, checked, they're like, "We don't see any cars that got hit." So we both walked over there together. We're looking at the damage. There's no damage at all. I must have been mistaken or something happened. I have no idea. There was no damage on the car at all. So they said, what you should do is just take some photos of the car and then do what you're gonna do. Put your name on there, your cell phone number, and your insurance information. So I took the photos and I wrote my name, Mark Walz, on there. I put my cell phone number and then I put Mark Wallace's insurance information and policy number on there. The next day, I get a phone call from a car insurance company and they are asking for Mark Walz, me. I say, "Yes, this is he." And they said, "Were you the owner of a car involved in an accident recently?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm not the owner." They're like, "Oh, okay, were you the driver?" I was like, "Well, I was kind of the driver, but I wasn't driving. I wasn't driving the car. I wasn't involved in the accident. I wasn't driving it." They're like, "Oh, okay, so were you a passenger?" I was like, "No, I wasn't a passenger. I mean, I was driving it, but I wasn't driving it in the accident." And they got so confused. They're like, "Okay, so sorry, we got the wrong number. We'll call back." Or like, "We'll call someone else." A few minutes later, they called back me again, asked the exact same questions. This time I tried to explain the situation more clearly. I said that I indeed had been driving the car, but I had parked it, and that but I didn't own it, that it had rolled out of the parking lot, across the street, and hit a parked car just on its own volition. And for some reason, they could not understand this. They could not grasp this story. They could not figure out what I was telling them. They were still under the impression that I was driving the car or as the owner, and they kept calling me Mark Wallace. I kept explaining to them over and over what happened in simpler and simpler terms. I said, I, Mark Walz, am borrowing this car owned by Mark Wallace, and I parked the car without the parking brake on. It rolled out of the parking lot, across the street, and hit a parked car. And they're like, oh, okay, we get it, that makes sense. Well, we'll call you back if we need anything else. A few minutes later, they call back again. But it was a different person this time. Same insurance company, different person. They said, okay, we figured out the situation. Here's what happened. A Honda Civic owned by Mark Wallace was being loaned to Mark Walz. Mark Walz took the Civic to a speedway, left the parking brake off, and then the car rolled out of the parking lot, across the street, and hit a parked car. It hit a parked Toyota Corolla with no one in it. And you are the owner of that Toyota Corolla, right? I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not me. I said it once again. I said, I had been driving this Honda Civic. I parked the car. I was not inside of it. And that I was not driving either vehicle. I know I was not the owner of either vehicle, but I had the car. And I explained more and more. They seemed to get more confused. But I think we finally figured it out. Like, they finally understood me. They were able to repeat it back perfectly. They laughed about it. They apologized. They said, we're so sorry. We're so confused. We got it. And so an hour passed and I didn't hear from them. So I'm like, thank goodness they finally got it. So then they called back again. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this going to be about? So they said, okay, so sorry to bother you again, but we definitely know what happened now. This is what happened. We're going to tell you. They said, so what happened is the following. A Honda Civic owned by Mark Wallace was being loaned to Mark Walz, you. Mark Walz took the Civic to a speedway and left the parking brake off. Then the car rolled away from the pump, out of the parking lot, across the street, and hit a parked car, a Toyota Corolla, owned by a man named Mark Wall. And I was like, what? And they're like, yes, the owner of the car you hit, his name is Mark Wall. And I was like, and they apparently, this is true, this guy named Mark Wall walked out to his car, undamaged car, and sees a note with a cell phone number and an insurance company, an insurance policy, and then a misspelling of his own name on the car, and he's wondering what this all is about. So he calls the insurance company to ask him what this is about. They have no idea. So they're the ones calling me on the cell phone to ask what in the world even happened. He calls him and causes this mass confusion with all these names that sound so alike, and an non-injury, no damage, driverless accident. And I had to stay on the phone and explain the story over and over again to multiple insurance agents who kept getting on the phone because they wanted to hear the funny story. And I'm telling them the story, and everyone's laughing in the background this whole time. And then I never did hear anything else about it again, thankfully. That was the end of it. But the biggest lesson that I learned from this confusing situation is, first, always park your car if you have a manual, park it in first gear and put the emergency brake on. And don't eat gas station chili dogs. It just makes a bad situation so much worse. So much worse. Thank you.